Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my December wrap-up part 2. So just to kick things off, I just want to say again, thank you so much to everyone who watched my videos over the course of Vlogmas. I made a lot of videos and I'm very glad to be not making that many videos anymore, to have my evenings free again without video editing having to be done. I will link to the playlist up in the cards just in case you want to peruse it to see if there are any videos you missed over the course of the month. Also, my favorite books of the year video went up. You guys have been like very responsive to that video. Like, my favorite books of the year video is always my most popular video of the year, but it's kind of crazy to me like how many views that video already has. It's nothing like trend worthy or anything like that, but for me personally, that's a lot of views to have over the course of like less than a week. So again, thank you so much to everyone. I mean, even if you watch any of my videos, thank you again just for participating in this. So I have about 6 books that I want to talk to you guys about. I got significantly more reading done in the second half of the month as like Vlogmas wrapped up and everything like that. So let's jump into the books. So the first book that I have is Severence by Ling Ma. This is a relatively new release. It came out in the fall of this year. This is one of those books that's really hard to describe. I feel like the way that it's pitched on the like dust jacket and in marketing material and things like that gives you a very different vibe than what this book is actually about. This book flashes back and forth between 2 different time periods, and you are following this character named Candace Chen who works in New York City. There is this like major flu outbreak that happens, and so you're basically following the time period like right when the outbreak is just starting to happen overseas, and then it slowly like spreads around the world and specifically to New York City where Candace Chen lives. And then you are also following this timeline that is farther into the future when there are just like less people around, and Candace Chen ends up joining this other group of people who are headed to Chicago. They're headed to this place that they called the facility, and the leader of this group named Bob knows about this place where they can basically have like access to more resources and food and shelter and things like that. So yeah, that's like the really basic synopsis, but this is kind of also like a 2-part story where it is this slightly dystopian survivalist type of story, but it's also this like weird commentary. I don't want to say weird, I just mean weird, like unsettling sort of commentary on like Gen X and society and things along those lines. It's one of those books that the entire time I was reading it, I couldn't figure out whether or not I liked it. It's like the writing is really good, and I found like the more survivalist dystopian stuff to be more compelling than the basic literary navel gazing to be. But again, that's more my personal preference about books in general. I thought some of the things she explored in here to be really, really interesting, especially like the concepts of like home and family, especially when like all of your biological family is like missing. What do you do then? And like finding your identity in the places that you live and the people around you and where you work and things like that, and how like sort of unfulfilling that whole thing is. There were parts of it that I think were supposed to be surprising that I saw to be very predictable. Maybe it's because I read a decent amount of genre fiction that I could see it sort of coming, but I don't know if they were like supposed to be surprising or not. Like maybe if you don't read a lot of genre fiction, you won't see the tropes, so to speak. Ling Ma is a really strong writer, but I think plot wise it was a bit of a mixed bag. Like there's a lot of people who really, really love this book, and I think that there's a good reason to love this book, but it's just like one of those books that didn't really work for me because it was trying to do 2 very different things in the same book, and it felt like it didn't really mesh really well, and I ended up just like liking one of the ideas better than the other. So the next thing that I finished was a novella, and that is Prime Meridian by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Anyone who's been watching my channel for a while knows I really enjoy Silvia Moreno Garcia's books. Signals to Noise is one of my all-time favorite books. I like this, I didn't love it, and a lot of my sort of quibbles with it just have to do with the fact that it's a novella. I think that if this story and these characters were fleshed out a lot more, I would love it. So in this story, you are following this character named Amelia who lives in Mexico. This takes place like slightly in the future, and there are like colonies and settlements on Mars, and Amelia dreams of living on Mars one day, but she is like extremely poor, and so it's not really a viable option. And so you're kind of just following Amelia in her like day to day as she's dealing with the struggles of being poor and like the difficult decisions that she has to make and the complicated relationships that she has with like her sister and her ex-boyfriend. And so like part of it is the fact that Amelia works as like this rent-a-friend where people pay her to have her keep them company. And so like she is a friend to this woman who was an actress back in the day. Part of it is like following that, and then part of it is just Amelia living her life, and there's like a little bit of a love story there. I feel like plot wise it's not super great, but Silvia Moreno Garcia is really good at creating really interesting characters, characters who are morally gray and slightly abhorrent at times, but like you still feel really compelled by them. Also, based on the cover, because I did not read the synopsis super hard, I definitely thought that this was going to be like a straight up sci-fi book where she would go to space or it would take place partially in space, and it isn't that. So warning to anyone else who might be interested in this book based on the cover alone. But that's like, you know, my bad for not reading the synopsis, I suppose. So yeah, I don't know. It's not like a novella where I feel super compelled to tell you guys to pick it up, like say Martha Wells' series or something like that. But if you like a good character study and you like novellas, or you like Silvia Moreno Garcia's characters specifically, it's not a bad one to pick up. I would say, like, if it's on sale still for like $2 or $3, it's not a bad purchase to make. All right, another book that I had really complicated feelings about because apparently that's the theme for this end of the month. Commonwealth by Ann Patchett. So I made the terrible mistake of listening to this on audiobook. If you're going to pick up this book, do not do that, because this book is so freaking confusing if you try to listen to it. And you might be thinking, Rincey, why didn't you just switch to the physical copy since you have the physical copy? I was listening to this as an audiobook on like a really slow day at work, and so I basically just like got through the entire audiobook in that work day. By the time I realized that listening to it on audio was a terrible decision, it was already too late. So the story starts off in Southern California in the past. I think it's like the 1950s or 60s. It takes place at this baby's christening, and this one character ends up kissing the mother of that baby. That basically sets off the divorce of those two separate marriages, and then those two separate marriages sort of like end up joining together. These two families end up joining together, and then you follow them over the course of the future, over like a couple of generations of time. So the great thing about this book is that Ann Patchett is a really amazing writer, and it shines in this book for sure. Like I said, though, I had a really hard time with this book because, again, it spans multiple generations. It doesn't go chronologically. It like jumps around in time quite a bit. There's very little indication about which time period you're in, at least in the audiobook. And there's also very little indication as to like which character's point of view you are following. So you're following multiple people within multiple generations. And I personally got really confused about like who was married to who and who was related to who and how all of these different characters fit together and the complicated web that is this family. But that might have been something that I would have been okay with if I was reading the physical book. But it also was one of those things where, again, when there are multiple perspective books, there are certain perspectives that I cared about more than others, and that is definitely true for this book. And there were certain things that I like, again, saw coming that I don't know if it was meant to be a surprise or not. Like she might have been like very obviously laying down the groundwork for certain things. But I think that, again, Ann Patchett is a really strong writer, and she does some really great explorations of like families and relationships and terrible life decisions and the way that those things impact the future in a really interesting way in a relatively short book. So I think that if you are an Ann Patchett fan, this is definitely one that you should pick up. Maybe it's one that I'll pick up again in the future and like read the physical copy of, so that way I can have a different sense of it. But if you are going to read this book, do not pick up the audiobook. All right, the next book that I finished was Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. This was a book I had, again, complicated feelings about. This is the last Gillian Flynn book that I had to read besides her novella, The Grown Up. And I feel like with this book, reading it last, it was pretty obvious that this was her first book. I think that the mystery isn't as strong and the characters aren't quite as compelling, and it felt more like horribleness for horribleness' sake rather than well-developed characters who are horrible people like her later books. So in this story, you are following this character named Libby, who, when she was about 7 years old, her sisters and her mother were brutally murdered, and her brother was convicted for the murders. And then 25 years later, Libby is contacted by this group called the Kill Club, who are like obsessed with unsolved or sort of like really horrific murders like this one. And they are trying to find out more details about the murders, and a lot of them also believe that Ben isn't the murderer. And so Libby actually starts to look into this night for the first time in her life, and starts to discover things, and obviously things are not as they seem. This book feels a little bit underdeveloped compared to her other ones. It's still a strong book because, again, Gillian Flynn is a great writer, and so like a great writer writing an average book is still above average in terms of general books. But also, like, I found the mystery aspect of this to be kind of obvious. Like, I guessed what happened pretty early on for the most part. There was like one part that I didn't see coming, but like overall I kind of figured out what was happening, and because of that, this book felt like a little bit of a drag. Like, it is meant to be like a bit of a slow burn, but it's also one of those books where like I didn't feel compelled by the story to keep reading it. I just kind of wanted to know what the ending was to see if I was right or not. So like that's never really a fun experience when you are reading a book. Like if you're reading the book just to see if you're right or just to see what the ending is, it's not that enjoyable, as opposed to like if you're compelled to keep reading the book because you're compelled by the story and things like that. So yeah, again, another book that I gave a 3 out of 5 stars because to me it wasn't my favorite Gillian Flynn experience. It's not terrible, but it's not my favorite, so there's that. All right, next up I did a reread of the book Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. I actually listened to this one on audiobook as well because all the audiobooks for this series are up on Hoopla. I listened to Cinder back in June. I actually looked it up to see how long it had been between the two. And I remember like I started Scarlet almost immediately after finishing Cinder, but then I'm like not a binge reader at all. But I was like kind of trying to find an audiobook to listen to, and I remembered that I hadn't finished listening to Scarlet because I was talking to one of my friends about the Lunar Chronicle series. Scarlet, again, not my favorite out of the series. I think that the beginning gets off to like a really slow start, and I'm not like a huge Wolf Scarlet person, but I still really enjoyed the series a lot, and I am kind of excited to pick up Cress because I think Cress is my favorite out of the series. But again, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space in between the books. I think that these are kind of nice to drop in randomly when I can't figure out what I want to read or I need something to listen to specifically that I know I'm going to enjoy. So yeah, I like the Lunar Chronicles. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. The same woman narrates the entire series and she's really great at it. So I highly recommend them on audio if you haven't given them a try already. And the final book that I have to talk about in this video is The Map of Salt and Stars by Jennifer Zenab Jokadar. This is a book that I have mixed feelings about. I literally just finished it today, so I haven't completely formed all of my feelings about it yet. I don't even know what I'm going to rate this yet because, again, I have complicated feelings about this book. So this story takes place in 2011, and you are following this character named Noor, who is of Syrian descent. She was born in New York City, but everyone else in her family was born in Syria, but then her family moved to New York City. And then after her father passes away from cancer, the mother decides to move them all back to Syria. But obviously Syria during this time period is not a very stable country, and it's not the same place that they remember from before. And so there is an attack that happens that ends up blowing up their house and injuring some of her family members, and so they are forced to leave their home and figure out what they're going to do next. Also in this book, you are hearing the story about this girl named Rawia who lived during the 12th century, and it's a story that Noor's father told her when she was younger, and it's about this girl who basically dressed up as a boy to become a warrior and to be an apprentice to this famous map maker. Alright, so the reasons why I have mixed feelings about this book. I did not care about the Rawia storyline at all. So like the beginning of every chapter has like a little bit of a snippet of the story about Rawia. Did not care about that at all. Like if that had been a separate book unto itself, like maybe I would have felt more connected to that part of the story, but I just didn't. I really felt connected to the main storyline. This book does a great job of talking about the horrific and difficult experience of Syrian refugees and the terrible things that they have to go through once they are forced to leave their homes. That part of the story is like really beautiful, really heartbreaking. Parts of the story do feel really simplistic to me. I'm not sure if it's the writing itself that is simplistic or if it's just because this is a refugee story and it feels like every possible bad thing that could happen happens to this family. And so sometimes when I was reading through this book, like really tragic things would happen and I would feel really heartbroken, but it also slightly felt like there were boxes that she was checking off of different terrible things that could happen to a refugee family and having it happen to this family. But there are also points in this book that feel just so moving. This family and this girl are both grieving their father, their dead father, as well as grieving the loss of their home and other people that they knew and things like that. In like full disclosure, my dad's like death anniversary is coming up in like a week and a half or 2 weeks. And so like reading those scenes while knowing that's coming up and having that in front of mind made me like really emotional. But yeah, there were other times when it just felt like the writing was overly simple. Now, I do believe that this is supposed to be a young adult book, so that might be why the writing is more simplistic. But sometimes with stories like this, when writers are trying to tell about this very specific experience that happens in another part of the world, it's hard to understand whether or not the experiences that like characters like this go through are realistic or not. Now, obviously, I know like refugees go through really, really terrible things and have impossible hurdles that they have to get over in order to find a safe place to go. So I'm not like discounting that by any means, but I don't know. Sometimes this book just felt like it was watering it down just a little bit too much. But that being said, again, I found a lot of this to be really moving and really heartbreaking, and I think is a really good book to pick up if you want a fictional story about the refugee crisis and what it's like, specifically from when a person loses their home and is forced to leave to like them getting to a safer spot, so to speak. Because I think a lot of times we see refugees sort of like when they've already arrived in these other countries or these other places, and we don't see as much like what their life was like before and like the hurdles that they had to overcome. So for that point, this book is very well done. All right, so that is everything that I have for this video. So I mentioned in my 2019 goals video about how I was like going to do these quarterly goals. And so I thought one thing that I could do with my monthly wrap-ups, at least the one that I do at the very end of the month, is to sort of like check in a little bit. Now, obviously, it's December, so my goals haven't started yet, but I kind of wanted to have this as like a starting point because now it's like officially going to be the beginning of the year. So my two things that I'm going to be focusing on are reducing my physical TBR and trying to read books off of the Book Riot Best of list. So my sort of tentative goals are to have sort of like a net 5 down of my physical TBR. So my physical TBR right now is at 65 unread books. That's higher than the number I mentioned in that goals video because I like forgot to count a couple of books. They were like in a different part of my room and things like that, and I got a couple of books for Christmas and stuff like that. So yes, I'm currently at 65 books. If I read anything between like Friday and Monday, I'm just going to count that towards the January net of 5. So my goal is to be to 60 books by the end of January. So if I read like 7 books but acquire 2, I'm still at a net 5. And then my other is to do at least 2 books off of the Book Riot list. I would like to do 3 if possible. Like I feel like 3 is a nicer number. I made like a full list of all of the books that I have yet to read from that list, and I actually have 35. So if I did like 3 a month, I could actually get through the entire list. But again, no pressure on myself to do these things. Like I'm the type of person who really likes really evenly round numbers like that. But if I don't do it, it's fine. So yes, 2 is my real goal. 3 is sort of like my stretch goal because I feel like those 3 books are going to be completely different from my TBR books because I don't own any of the books that are on the Book Riot list. And then also I'm going to have to like read books for Read or Dead and things like that. So yes, that's sort of where my head is at right now. We'll see how I do at the end of January. Hopefully I remember to do these sort of like monthly check-ins on my quarterly goals, but I think that'll like help me also to continue with these goals further than just the first couple of weeks of the month. So yes, that's everything that I have for this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, or if you have any questions about the books, obviously leave that down in the comment section below. Otherwise, let me know what your favorite read was so far this month. If you